Hey, deserving listeners, let's continue watching all the clips that you've been sending me of Love is Blind Season 3 cast members doing interviews and whatnot. Let's watch.
Like the whole rating thing happened. I totally regret the rating thing, but I just still am like, why the hell were you asking me to rate girls? Like, who wins? Like, how? Like, why did I even play into that?
First of all, I'll tell you, Cole, you always lie. Are you kidding me? Let me teach you something.
I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that perspective. It's an interesting topic, right? Because what is it that people do in these situations? Something I don't think we have a very mature conversation about. I think in our ideal, everyone thinks that their partner is an 11 and everyone else is a piece of crap in comparison to their partner. And certainly that can be true, but that couldn't possibly be true for everyone, right? So I think it also reflects an American contemporary notion of like what attractiveness is, what love is, that it's about how good you look on Instagram or something, which is really destructive. That notion is just ridiculous and counterproductive and inhuman and just not true. When I think about my wife, I mean, my wife is a legit, she's an 11, but, well, what do I say here? Well, I don't think my wife thinks I'm an 11. I'm sure that if she were to rate the physical attractiveness of everyone that she knows or everyone on the internet or something, I'm positive, or I imagine that at least in a certain dimension, I am not at the top of the list. Should that matter though, is the thing. Now, on the other hand, what dimension are we talking about in terms of attractiveness? Because I would hope that for my wife, when she looks at me, when she thinks about my physical nature and her attractiveness to it, that it's not just about certain things that she prefers about face and body or skin or height or something like that, that it has to do with our entire relationship and the chemistry and our bond and our emotional connection and our life together, all that, right? That, of course, is much more human, much more in reality. So when Zenab asked him to rate her and to rate Colleen, what dimension was he evaluating on? I think he was evaluating on that first dimension of, well, if I were to see just a picture of the two of you and were forced to rate you on some sort of scale, like you're rating a movie or something, then yeah, Colleen's a 10 and you're a 9. But if I were to rate the two of you in terms of who I want to be with and who I'm attracted to, who I want to get naked with and roll around with or spend the rest of my life with or whatever, who I think about, then you are the one I want to be with and Colleen is not. I'm guessing that's even what he would say given what was happening. So to tell someone to lie about it, I don't think that's the best thing. I think we should have a more nuanced understanding of our needs and our attractions and be more in alignment with the humanness of attraction and not what the internet or society tells us as to what we're supposed to be attracted to, right? Well, let's just say that you out there, you're in a relationship, and when you look at your partner, your spouse, let's say you might rate them physically if they were naked standing next to everyone else that you know about on the internet, the top most attractive people or other people that you find yourself attracted to, that you might put them at a 5 and you might put some other people at a 10. You might put some people at a 1 or whatever it is that you're. Does that mean that you're not attracted to your partner? Does that mean that you don't want to be with your partner? Probably not, right? So when you're asked, so let's say your partner asks you, rate me on a scale from 1 to 10, are you supposed to consider that question, that very narrow understanding of what attraction is, and say, well, and this is internally, you're like, well, I would rate my spouse a 5, but I don't want to hurt their feelings, so I'll lie and I'll say that they're a 10. Is that the approach? Or should the approach be like, well, honey, when you ask me to rate you, what do you mean by that? What are you talking about exactly? If you're talking about someone that I would look at in a magazine and say like, ooh, that person's hot, that's one question, but that's not really the way I or really any human is oriented. That's the way teenagers are oriented sometimes because they don't know better, or shallow individuals are oriented because they're more concerned about how things look to the outside world than really paying attention to their needs and considering other people's feelings. So if you're asking me to rate my attraction to you, then I will give you that number. But I don't know if it's very productive for me to give you unless you really understand that the number that I give you has really nothing to do with me as a human being and our relationship and my attraction to you, right? It's also reflective of our privilege of youth, right? And of course, women suffer from this more than men do, but men suffer from it as well, that people will do all sorts of things to their face and all sorts of filters on their phone to look younger, to have fewer wrinkles, less gray in your hair, and to be slimmer or whatever. And that's a problem. People have a variety of situations, right? They have variety of hair, and variety of body shapes, variety of faces, variety of wrinkledness or something. And this notion that somehow anything other than the way people look when they were 18 years old is disgusting is ridiculous. And so when we ask our partner, or when they ask us to rate, it's kind of potentially standing on all of that ridiculous notion that marketers have been pumping into our heads since we were born. We weren't always like this. People 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, but particularly 100 years ago, did not believe the things that we currently believe in mainstream Western society as to what dictates your worth as a human being and what makes you attractive or not. So there's a lot of things involved in that question. Should you just lie to someone? I just don't think that's the way that just skims off the top. And now, if someone asks you like they're an acquaintance or something, you don't know them very well, do you really have the time to get into it with them? Might you have a white lie in a situation like that? Maybe. I wouldn't, personally. I don't. At least I would try not to. I wouldn't want to hurt their feelings, but I'd be like, well, it's a complicated question. Do you want to get into that? Because it's complicated. Because if you do lie and it's obvious, or you have a policy of that sort of thing, it sets a precedent that your partner knows that they can't trust you with anything. Anytime that you are complimenting them, is that also a lie? I just don't think that's a functional way to live for anyone. And I will say that when I first contemplated what was going on between him and Zenib, I might have even said this in the reaction video, that maybe he just should have lied or had spun it around a little bit in his head a little bit so that he could say 10 instead of 9. He could have said, well, 9 and 10 is not that different. Or, well, maybe she's a 10. I'll say she's... So I'm not saying I'm above all of that. I'm just saying that I think we should really think about what all of that means. I think another aspect of this is that imagine for yourself how people would rate you. I think people have different comfortabilities with that. The other thing is whatever rating someone gives you, that's not your rating. I feel like that's another part of contemporary culture, that if you're an 8 and 5 people say you're an 8, then you're just an 8 by definition. Factually, scientifically, you're an 8. And if a 9 comes along, you lose. Attraction is very individual. Now, internet Tinder stuff, is Hinge similar to Tinder in this way, where you just look at a picture? That denies all that and denies your ability to actually experience someone in the flesh, 3D, and experience attraction and experience what actually would be happening in a relationship. Someone can look great and you could be attracted to a 2-dimensional filtered picture on Tinder, and then you meet them in person and yeah, they look the same from the picture. It looks like an actual somewhat accurate picture of them, but you have zero chemistry attraction to the individual. So another part of this, it's like if Zenib, according to him, according to one dimension, is a 9 and Colleen is a 10, does that mean Zenib is by definition less attractive to everyone on the planet than Colleen? No, of course not. Maybe y'all know all this stuff, hopefully at least, but I don't know if I get a chance to talk about this very often.
Who wins? Like, how? Like, why did I even play into that?
First of all, I'll tell you, Cole, you always lie. Are you kidding me? Let me teach you something.
I should have.
Yeah. With shit like that, you lie. Rate me 11 out of 10.
Our thing was like, our whole thing was being brutally honest with each other. And like Zineb was honest. Zineb told me I wasn't her type, but that never makes the air. But she told me all the time I wasn't her type, and she hadn't dated guys that looked like me. But that's just not the storyline, right? The storyline is, oh, Zineb's not Cole's type. But it's like this went both ways so much more than people know.
Yeah.
And then my side of the conversation would be shown. So it's just like, I was saying those.
That's interesting. Yeah, they did not show that. Who knows how accurate he is about that, but he's saying that she said on camera that he wasn't her type as well. And it was a both ways conversation. So if that's true, then that would put his comments into a different context where he thinks, well, we're both saying these things about each other, so we're not hurting each other's feelings really, because we both agree that we wouldn't normally date each other, and they just show his side of it. And that would explain why Zineb didn't seem to react in the moment to those kinds of statements.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual. Navigating all the various challenges we face can make you feel unsure or stuck in place. Whether it's a relationship, or going through grief, or considering a new career. And, generally speaking, a therapist can really help with that. By helping you to explore your feelings, and by giving you the space to clarify what you want to do. In my life, I can't imagine where I'd be without the therapy I've had. During some of the biggest moments of my life, therapists have been there for me. To slow me down, to listen to me, to help me explore. Well, that's where BetterHelp comes in. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Kirk. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Ooh, Cole. Okay. Well, we'll get to that in a moment because I have some questions about the reunion and how other couples were kind of acting. But so were you going to say yes?
No.
You weren't going to say yes?
No, I wasn't ready. I was totally willing to keep dating. We had talked off camera. We were ready to continue our relationship without cameras around.
Interesting. Is he going against contract by saying that? Because I'm pretty sure you can't say that, right? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that wasn't specifically part of my conspiracy theory, but that they were going to date afterwards. I suspected they had broken up. But yeah, it makes sense that they would think, well, maybe when the cameras aren't around, things will improve. And, well, that's interesting. If he went into, who knows if he's lying, but if he went into the wedding and that was what he thought, well, we're both going to say no. And I suspect that he knew that she was going to go first. I'm pretty sure they have a conversation with the producers. They sit down with them and they're like, who wants to go first? And what are you going to say? And this kind of thing. And it might have been individually, like the producer meets with Zineb, the producers meet with Cole, and Cole knows that Zineb is going to go first. So you imagine, according to this hypothesis, that he goes to the altar. She's going to say no. I don't have to say no. And we will talk about how we have some questions, or there were just too many issues, or whatever. There's certain things that you say in a situation like that. And then after the season ends, then we'll date and we'll see. And maybe things will work out, maybe they won't, but that's the way we're going to do it. So he thinks at the altar that he's still in a relationship with her. He's still in an ongoing relationship with her. And then that happened where because I was thinking that they had broken up prior and thought they would be friends. And then when she blasts him at the altar, he felt very hurt because he thought they were going to be more amicable in their breakup. But if he thought that they were still in a relationship at that point, if that's true, and who knows, it could be lies or distorted or something, then that's pretty awful. And then the other aspect of betrayal, if that's true, is that he's like, well, wait, so obviously this was planned. She claims it wasn't planned. A lot of people think that her speech at least was somewhat planned. And he would think, well, when did she decide that she was going to do this to me? has it been for a long time? Were our conversations about dating after the show was over, were those all lies? Why would she lie? Was she trying to manipulate me? Was she trying to suck me in so that I would stand up here without any defenses so that she could blast me like this? Like, wow, that's rough, right? Akin to infidelity, right? That someone would behind the scenes be working against you like that. That would do a number on your trust of other human beings. That would be very hurtful. So if that's all true, then the tears that he had at the altar and at the reunion, I think, make even more sense. Now, who knows? Maybe it's all distorted.
No, I wasn't ready. I was totally willing to keep dating. We had talked off camera. We were ready to continue our relationship without cameras around and without all the pressures that come with knowing that you're being filmed. It just was too fast. Like,
Yeah.
I had learned that from my previous relationship. Like, if things aren't really smooth and you guys really can just be in a car together and not have to talk.
Okay, well, if you learned something from your first relationship, in which his first marriage, in which I think he said he dated for a couple months and then got engaged for a few months and then got married for 5 months or something like that, you'd think you would learn enough to know not to go on a show like this that forces you to get married quickly. So there's that. But anyway, so yeah, he's saying that he had learned from the past. I think he's also saying that there were signs in his first marriage that the relationship wasn't compatible and that he ignored them and got married anyway. And so he didn't want to do that again.
And just, you're just comfortable with each other. It's like, don't dive into a marriage. And so we weren't to that like comfortable place. And so I wasn't ready to just wash my hands of the relationship and be like, I'm done with you. That was not the case at all. I mean, night before our wedding, 2 nights before, we went out to dinner and we did the whole thing off camera and we talked about it and we knew like we weren't ready to get married, but.
All right, interesting. I mean, it sounds credible, right? Zenib claims none of this. She claims that she didn't know what she was going to say until she was walking up the aisle and she saw that his family wasn't there, which she knew for weeks that his family wouldn't be there. And then she saw a scared look on his face. That's what she said in the interview. And that was the entirety of her explanation in that interview that I reacted to. And maybe she's come out with more statements, but she says that the scared look on his face and the fact that his parents, his family was not at the wedding, which again, she already knew, that's when she said, he's not ready to get married. And so I'm going to say no. I just finally figured it out that I'm going to say no. And as she's saying no, she spontaneously had 12 bullet points at the ready that were hurtful and laid out the entire reason as to why she was saying no. I can't obviously know the truth. Maybe it's this whole other truth. I don't know. But his story fits with my conspiracy theory, which is that it's not really conspiracy. Well, it is kind of conspiracy-ish, I guess, but the real story but that's interesting that it was 2 nights before the wedding. That's when they had that conversation. I could see it. I mean, I could see the two of them prior to that having some conversations with friends or even internal ideas about things. But they actually told each other, according to him, 2 nights before, that they were not going to get married, that it's just they weren't ready for it, which would make total sense, right? The two of them seem like smart individuals, and they've been around the block, they know things, and so of course they were like, I don't know if we should really get married now. I mean, maybe down the line, but I think we still need to work. Of course they were like that. Anyone else in that situation would have been that way.
That was not the case at all. I mean, night before our wedding, 2 nights before, we went out to dinner and we did the whole thing off camera and we talked about it and we knew like we weren't ready to get married, but we were ready to like keep our relationship going. And she told me that.
Wow. So knowing that, you were completely blindsided, yeah?
Yeah, because
again, I just want to really drill down on this. What sounds more likely, his story or her story? Just think about it. Now, who knows? She could be telling the truth. He could be lying. Could be a third truth. Who knows? But what's more likely? Because I've suspected that they all have those conversations prior to, even the people that say yes, yes, when they're being interviewed on camera, they claim they don't know what they're going to say before they get to the altar. That's ridiculous. Brennan and Alexa, really? Upon walking down the aisle, they're like, what am I going to say? I have no idea what I'm going to say. Of course, they knew what they were going to say. And of course, they talked about it as a couple because that's the rational thing to do. They live together. They spend all their time together. So it's going to come up, right? The cameras are only there a minority of the time. They probably have all sorts of conversations about how the TV show is going, that one producer that is really pressuring, all this stuff, right? When the cameras show up tomorrow, what kind of thing do we want to be doing? There's all sorts of conversations.
I knew, like, she still, told me like the day of that she was going to be like, we both were like, who knows? Like, what if like somehow, like if someone does say yes, sure, it makes you like feel like you more so would want to say yes and be very hard to like break someone's heart. So like that wasn't like, I was like, there's a chance she says yes. It's a TV show. I don't know like what's going to happen, but I knew that like she knew that I was not going to say yes. And the producers knew that I was not going to say yes. And I think that.
Right. Interesting. So I thought that as well, because that would be absolutely rational for the producers to ask questions around that. The way the show is proposed, they don't have those conversations. They just let the people do what they want to do, and then they all magically somehow make a decision at the altar, which is stupid. And it upsets me because, and I've said this before, when I watch these shows, I don't want to watch something that's fake. I want to watch something that's real. Now, I know a lot of it is fake. There's just no way around that. But I am trying to get at the truth of the matter because, one, it just feels better to know reality TV is at least closer to reality than otherwise. And also, if I'm going to use it as a jumping off point to talk about humans, we have to be talking about real humans doing real human things, not ridiculous things that they did because the producers told them that they're supposed to do, right? So he's saying that the producers knew he was going to say no. Now, he's also framing it as if Zeneb hadn't come forward saying she was going to say no. He said he was going to say no to the producers and her, and then she had to deal with that, it sounds like. But I imagine Zeneb also had major questions, right?
That's why they asked Zeneb first, is because they thought she was most likely to say yes based off what she was telling everyone.
Interesting. So again, he's confirming. And I'm guessing that this is the truth because I think he has a lot of reasons contractually, legally, to not talk about these kinds of things because the cast members almost never talk about this sort of stuff. So he's saying that, and maybe because it's later on in the interview, he's more broken down and forgetting that he's supposed to follow the contract, but who knows. So he's saying that they asked Zeneb to go first. And I thought where that was headed was, well, so who knows what really happened? Because they could be telling Cole something different too, right, behind the scenes. But what they told Cole, according to Cole's story, is that they decided Zeneb would go first because she might say yes, and that would be more dramatic if she says yes and then he says no. I could see that. I could see that being the case because that would be more dramatic, right? If she said yes, he says no, that's more dramatic. Whereas if they knew she was going to say no and she says no, yeah, I'm guessing that if the producers knew she was going to say no, they would have rather have had Cole go first because that would have been more in line with the narrative I think they were painting, which is that Cole's a jerk face who's rejecting her. And then you would have Zeneb upset and crying, and even though Zeneb might be on the fence, it would play better if he was being the rejecter. So I'm guessing, given all that he's saying here, they didn't actually know what Zeneb was going to say. That's interesting. I think that leads to two possibilities. That one, Zeneb did know what she was going to say, but didn't tell the producers because of various hypothesized reasons. Or she was legit I can't imagine that she's legit on the fence. That she knew he was going to say no, and she's like, I don't know, maybe I'll say yes as a way of trying to pressure him, or I don't know. Or maybe she thought, well, maybe I'll say yes, and then he'll say no, and then afterwards I'll talk about what a jerk face, because she seemed to go into the wedding wanting to say her 12 bullet points, right? So I could see that. I don't know why I care so much about this, but I think again, if we have an idea of what really happened, then we can start to talk about all the things that we talk about on this channel, which is attachments and distortions and schemas and relationships and communication.
Yes. And the producers knew that I was not going to say yes. And I think that's why they asked Zenab first, is because they thought she was most likely to say yes based off what she was telling her.
Oh, I didn't catch that. He says, I think that's why they asked Zenab to go first. So he doesn't know why. So it's possible that, again, because this is just an hypothesis I had previous to what he said anyway, is they knew Zenab was going to say no. And then they said, well, if we went with you first, what would you say? And then Zenab says, well, I have these 12 bullet points. And they're like, ooh, that'll play well. So you go first. That could have been another possibility. Who knows? All right, well, that does it for that episode. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.